slideshows of the NSA for programs with names like Prism and Bull Run, but this was all stuff that was basically largely widely known by a few intrepid journalists and techno geeks. The problem was getting the public at large and journalists at large to care about any of this. And that, until the Snowden explosion, nobody cared about any of this. And all of a sudden, everybody cares about what Brazil thinks, what Germany thinks. Hey folks, they've been there all this time. In fact, predating the National Security Agency's founding was a treaty called UKUSA, which remains UK-USA, which remains secret to this day, a 1946 treaty that gave the 5 Anglo-Saxon nations on the planet, US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, special signals intelligence sharing access that no other nation, even NATO nations like Germany or France, would ever be able to get a hold of. The UKUSA Treaty remains in effect today, and not a word of it has ever been leaked to the public, just the general awareness that it exists. But that's why this is all, not just an old boys club, but not even a NATO club, but an Anglo-Saxon white guys club. It's been that way since the end of World War II and remains so today. In the meantime, we had, in 1960, the National Reconnaissance Office arise, first as an Air Force office just to control spy satellites, then it became an intelligence agency on its own. Now it's the largest intelligence agency in the United States government, by budget, not by people. And no one knows what it does. In the old days, arms control experts would go along with the secrecy of the NSA and the NRO because they said, these are the keys that make arms control possible. Because these spy satellites can look down and say, is there really a bomber gap? Is there really a missile gap? Is Russia really this far ahead? So everybody thought, it's cool that we have the NRO. What they didn't realize is that a fundamental change took place in the NRO when it began working more closely with the NSA in the late 70s and early 80s. And a lot of this was public info. The NRO would make public declarations and public presentations and say, we're here to serve the warfighter. They were not there to verify arms control treaties anymore. The NRO was there to serve the warfighter. And when you talk about a black budget, there are shades of black. The imaging satellites of the NRO are kind of grayish black. You hear things about the keyhole satellites and the big bird satellites, and the whole movie and book about the Falcon and the Snowman was all about imaging satellites of the NRO. But the larger part of NRO's budget over the last 20 years or so has moved into signal satellites, the listening satellites that it launches on a regular basis on behalf of the NSA. These satellites, we believe, have code names like Advanced Orion, Advanced Trumpet, MUOS, and all kinds of other stuff. But they are kept so much in the dark that even all these big exposés of the NSA has brought out virtually nothing about the NRO and its role in supporting NSA. When I talked about those radomes at Buckley Field in Denver, those are not just NSA radomes. Those are joint NSA-NRO radomes, and there are, like I said, there is now one new building at Buckley that is dedicated just to NSA employees, but there are 3 buildings in Buckley at the Aerospace Data Facility that have a mix of NRO and NSA employees because those 2 agencies work hand in hand all the time. And I think it's astonishing, given the 5 months now of exposés we've had about the NSA, that not a word really has come out about the NRO. The NRO had 6 major $1 billion plus launches during 2012. How much did you hear about any of them? None. We had, we believe, maybe 3 or 4 this year, very major. When Obama did his shift, or tilt, or whatever he calls that thing, pivot to the Pacific recently, sent Marines to Australia. There was also a new downlink basin that was put into Australia in the northwestern area for a new NRO satellite called MUOS, Multiple User Objective System. How much did that ground station get into the news? There was some in Australia, but how much here? How much of the MUOS satellite system itself billions upon billions of dollars per year. How much of anything regarding what the NRO does gets into the public? In fact, NRO was proud to announce 2 years ago that it had appointed the first woman head of a major US intelligence agency. It put out a press release about the fact. Not everything NRO does is secret. You can go to nro.gov and find a whole bunch of stuff out. You would think that maybe someone in the media would have an interest in the first woman head of the largest intelligence agency on the planet, particularly when the agency itself had put out a public press release. I didn't see anything other than Aviation Week and Space Technology cover this. This is a crime. These people are as much involved in space serving the warfighter as the NSA is, and yet they get nothing, no publicity. Just a couple other words on two other big agencies that fit this same model. These are pretty solid, squishy numbers as far as billions spent per year. After that, it gets real fuzzy because when you get into military commands, they're all wrapped into very large budget numbers. Nobody really knows what's going on. In 1980, after the failure of the hostage rescue mission, the Pentagon decided to meld things like Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, etc., and also intelligence-specific things like the ISA, the Intelligence Support Activity, into one large group called Joint Special Operations Command. JSOC was involved in a lot of things like Grenada, some of Clinton's small operations into Sudan and elsewhere, but it really got its oomph, not so much in the post-9/11 period, although there was some Afghanistan operations. Partially that was involved in the raid on bin Laden. What really made JSOC a new center of gravity in the very waning days of the Bush administration and during the Obama administration is that here you could have a one-stop shop that would handle armed drone attacks and hit squad attacks. And so particularly the JSOC facility in Djibouti on the east coast of Africa is one that can decide on a moment's notice, do we send in an extraordinary rendition squad or assassination squad? Do we send in drones? What are the pluses and minuses of both of that? Now CIA manages some drone attacks of I'm distinguishing here armed drones from surveillance drones. CIA manages some armed drone attacks, but the real deep black armed drone attacks take place through JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. And they jointly work through Ranger and SEAL, etc. actions to decide with the same group of people whether to do a hit squad, an extraordinary rendition, or an armed drone attack. Last Sunday, Navy SEALs attacked Somalia, attacked Libya. JSOC out of Djibouti. How much is reported about Djibouti and the U.S.'s major operations there? Another new major JSOC facility in Oman. How much do you hear about any of this? How much do you hear when the U.S. goes into northern Mali and other areas with new bases? No. The media considers it their duty not to talk about it. Scahill is probably the guy for JSOC type operations. He's the best. In the same way that James Bamford and Glenn Greenwald are some of your best sources for the NSA, Jeremy Scahill, and also probably Peter Singer on the privatization of Dirty Wars. Those two people are some of the best writers you can find on that subject completely. Now, James Bamford, the guy who's written so much about NSA, has really gotten into looking at Cyber Command lately for a very interesting reason. The idea of attacking and defending computer systems really was assigned early on to the U.S. Space Command here in Colorado Springs when there was still a national level Space Command. That Space Command eventually got folded into the Strategic Command in Omaha. And at that time everybody says, what are we going to do about computer attack and defense? And this was argued back and forth through the Bush administration, and then very early in the Obama administration they created a dedicated cyber command and put it under the deepest black of all. We don't really, $3 billion a year, $4 billion a year, there's really not a real good sense of where this is going. But one thing to notice, that holds a lot of information to it, is that Bamford, our NSA writer, has found that the headquarters of Cyber Command at Fort Meade, Maryland, which is also the headquarters of NSA, is going to be bigger than the NSA headquarters. And the new banner, sign outside Fort Meade says, Cyber Command, NSA. Cyber Command gets top billing. And the NSA director is also the commander of Cyber Command. What did they do? Well, we think they might have helped the Israeli 8200 unit develop the Stuxnet worm that went into the Iranian centrifuges. We think that there was a larger operation Cyber Command was involved in called Olympic Games, based on computer attacks on several nations. But like I said, the head of the Strategic Command, former head, is now under investigation for felony charges that he might have leaked some of that to the press. So this is how seriously they're treating any leaks of information about what Cyber Command does. And the money spent, Cyber Command now is about where the NSA was in the 1960s. Its influence is gargantuan. The amount of information you know about this is minimal, and there is no excuse not to have this agency, all these agencies, as accountable and transparent as possible. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing this happen again and again is because Cyber Command is a unit of strategic command, is all involved in global strike. Striking first at your enemies with a variety of tools. And were the American public ever to really grasp the significance of this, they'd realize how much we're on the battle initiation side of the street most of the time. And I think as a result of that, the more of this that we can keep secret from the US government's perspective, the better.